My wife cheated while I covered all our bills and sacrificed nights, so I divorced, quietly, and left her with nothing she thought she deserved. I'm a 32-year-old guy, and for years I thought I knew what it meant to be a husband. I believed it was about showing up, working hard, and keeping everything together so the person you love could feel safe and supported. Every morning I'd wake before dawn, pull on a shirt I'd barely had time to iron, and head into the office. Nights blurred into mornings as I stayed late to meet deadlines, sometimes grabbing a second job just to make sure the bills were paid on time. The mortgage didn't slip, and the utilities stayed uninterrupted. Every check I wrote, every phone call to negotiate a payment or chase an overdue invoice felt like a small victory. I was proud of it, quietly proud, without any expectation of praise. Sarah, my wife, was the picture of charm. Friends adored her, family looked at her with pride, and she had this effortless way of lighting up a room when she entered. People thought our marriage was perfect. I thought so too. What they didn't see, or what I refused to acknowledge, was how much I carried behind the scenes. She never asked about the late nights, the stress that etched lines into my forehead, or the way I juggled numbers and schedules just so life didn't feel like a constant scramble. It started with small things. She'd complain when the coffee machine broke, or when the groceries weren't exactly what she wanted. She'd spend more freely than we could afford. Shrugging off the bills, I quietly handled in the background. Sometimes, when she laughed with friends about plans she had without me, a twinge of loneliness hit, but I brushed it off, telling myself it was fine, that she was happy, and that should be enough. And so I kept going. I paid the bills, fixed the leaks, and stayed up into the early hours, making sure everything was in order. I told myself that one day Sarah would notice, that she would appreciate the weight I carried, and we'd both feel proud of what we'd built together. That belief became my quiet pride, a fragile shield against the small pangs of imbalance that I was just starting to notice. But I had no idea that the cracks I saw now were only the very beginning of a much larger fracture. It hit me more clearly as months passed. Sarah had this effortless way of being adored, almost like the world revolved around her charm, while I quietly held the scaffolding of our life together. Friends would gush about how lucky I was, how she lit up the room and made everything so perfect. I smiled along, of course, but inside there was a tightening in my chest I couldn't quite name. I was exhausted from long nights at work, from juggling payments, from the constant balancing act of making sure our life ran smoothly, but no one saw that. Not really. Sarah, meanwhile, carried on like nothing was amiss. She would flit through the house, laughing at TV shows, planning weekends with friends, and talking about parties she wanted to attend. One Friday evening, I remember her tossing me a glance while scrolling through her phone. "You're working late again?" she said, her tone light but slightly annoyed. "Can't you just take a break for once?" I forced a laugh. "Yeah, I guess I could," I said, hiding the tight knot in my stomach. I didn't want to argue. I wanted to be supportive, to let her feel comfortable. To keep the peace, small irritations started piling up. She complained about dishes left in the sink, about laundry that wasn't folded the way she liked, about meals that weren't exactly on schedule, and all the while, I was running on fumes, counting pennies to cover bills she assumed were magically taken care of, staying late at work to make ends meet. It should have stung, but I told myself this was just marriage. This was normal. And yet, when she leaned on me in moments of need, as they were, always felt a flicker of pride. I was the one who kept everything afloat, the one who could be counted on, the one who would never let her down. I convinced myself that this was love in action, that one day she would notice, that one day my sacrifices would matter in a way that went beyond bills and chores. For now, I held on to that fragile hope, unaware that the imbalance I was starting to sense would grow into something far worse than I could imagine, and that my quiet pride was about to be tested in ways I wasn't prepared for. Over time, the small pangs of unease I'd been ignoring started to grow into something sharper, more insistent. I began noticing things I couldn't easily explain late nights when she needed to work on a project, her phone tucked just out of sight, disappearing into the bedroom to take calls I wasn't meant to overhear. At first, I convinced myself it was nothing. Everyone deserves privacy, right? But there was a weight in the pit of my stomach I couldn't shake. One night, I came home from a 12-hour shift and caught her laughing at something on her phone, a laugh that didn't include me, that seemed entirely separate from our life together. I cleared my throat, and she looked up, startled. "Just a funny meme," she said, her smile slightly too quick to rehearsed. I nodded, forcing a smile back, but I couldn't help the tightening in my chest. It was that split-second hesitation in her eyes that made me uneasy. Friends would make offhand comments too. "Sarah is so popular at work," one coworker remarked, as if it were obvious she commanded attention wherever she went. I felt a flicker of something worry, but I brushed it off. I wanted to trust her. I wanted to believe that the woman I married, the woman everyone adored, was still the partner I thought she was. Yet the signs kept coming. The whispered conversations that stopped when I walked into the room, the sudden text notifications silenced as if by instinct, the vague defensiveness when I casually asked about her day. It wasn't anything I could prove yet, but it was enough to make me lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling. Wondering if I'd missed the first tremors of a fault line I couldn't yet see, I tried to push it away, telling myself it was paranoia, that my exhaustion was making me imagine things. But deep down, I felt a sense of dread creeping over me, an uncomfortable certainty that something in our life was shifting. Quietly, dangerously, away from the partnership I thought we had, and that unease was only the beginning. I never thought I'd find myself scrolling through someone else's messages, but one night, exhausted and restless, curiosity overpowered my hesitation. My hands shook slightly as I picked up her phone, something I had never done before, and there it was. A message from a name I didn't recognize, flirtatious, teasing, casual, the kind of message that shouldn't exist in a marriage built on trust. My heart slammed in my chest, my vision narrowing to the screen in disbelief. I confronted her gently at first. "Hey, who's this?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady, masking the panic rising inside me. "Just a friend from work," she said, smiling faintly, the kind of smile that felt rehearsed, the one that didn't reach her eyes. Nothing to worry about. But the unease clung to me like a second skin. There was something too familiar about the tone of the messages, the way she responded so quickly, so privately. My mind raced through every late night, every unexplained absence. Every time I'd stretched myself thin to keep things running smoothly, while she seemed distant. The house felt heavier that night, the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, the ticking of the clock, even the soft whir of the ceiling fan, it all felt like it was pressing against me, reminding me that nothing was as it seemed. I couldn't eat, I couldn't sleep. I wanted to believe it was nothing. I wanted to give her the benefit of the doubt, to trust that the woman I loved, the one everyone admired, wouldn't betray me. But every instinct in my body screamed the opposite. I felt betrayed before I even had the full story, like I had stumbled onto a fracture in the foundation of our life that night. I lay awake on our bed, staring at the ceiling, feeling the crushing weight of doubt. I wanted to confront her again, but I also wanted to gather more evidence, to know the truth before I broke apart completely, and deep down, a quiet, terrifying thought began to take root. Maybe the life I thought I'd built with her was just an illusion. The next few days were unbearable. I went through the motions at work, answered emails, made calls, and balanced bills. But my mind was elsewhere, haunted by those messages, by the thought that Sarah might be betraying me. Every time my phone buzzed, my heart jumped. Every knock at the door made me flinch. I was consumed by a mix of disbelief, anger, and a deep sinking sadness that I couldn't shake. Asterisk, I tried to talk to her casually, testing the waters. "You've been busy with work a lot lately," I said one evening, forcing a light tone. "Yeah, it's just been hectic," she replied. Brushing it off and glancing at her phone, something in her indifference cut deeper than any confrontation could. The casual ease with which she lied, the way she hid little things, I felt like I'd been working tirelessly to hold up a house built on trust, and every brick I'd placed was crumbling under me. I couldn't sleep. I would sit in the dark, staring at the faint glow of streetlights through our window, replaying moments over and over in my head. I remembered nights I'd stayed awake because she was asleep, thinking I was being considerate. I remembered weekends I'd sacrificed for bills and errands while she relaxed, smiling, oblivious, or so I thought. Then came the first undeniable proof. I found a receipt tucked in a jacket pocket, hotel charges at odd hours. My stomach lurched, bile rising in my throat. I felt my chest tighten, my hands trembling as I held the evidence. This wasn't a minor flirtation anymore. This was real. My world tilted. and the quiet confidence I had in our marriage collapsed into a pit of dread and heartbreak. I wanted to scream, to cry, to demand an explanation, but I didn't. I just sat there feeling small and powerless, my own sacrifices twisting in my mind like daggers. I realized with a cold certainty that I had been giving everything while she was giving none of her loyalty. And in that heavy, suffocating silence, I knew the life I thought we were building together was gone. What came next would change everything. I never imagined that. I'd find out the full truth in the most humiliating way possible. One evening, I was at a friend's small gathering when I overheard someone laughing at a story, and my heart stopped. They were talking about Saria, about her latest rendezvous, the same hotel charges I'd found, and the man she'd been seeing. I felt my stomach drop, my vision blur, my chest tighten. It wasn't just a suspicion anymore. The betrayal wasn't private. It wasn't subtle. It was out there, spoken casually, as if it were a joke. I excused myself and stepped outside, fumbling for my phone. I scrolled through the string of messages she'd sent, texts, photos, and plans she had carefully hidden. Each image, each word, felt like a punch I couldn't brace against. My hands were shaking, my breath came in short bursts, and suddenly the quiet life I thought I had, years of long nights, unpaid bills, endless sacrifice felt meaningless. I wanted to confront her immediately, to yell, to cry, to demand answers. But I realized something chilling. She didn't even know that I knew, and the thought that she assumed her actions were safe, invisible, enraged me more than anything. I walked home in a daze, the city lights feeling harsh against my eyes, the hum of cars on the street like a cruel soundtrack to my life unraveling. Every familiar sound in our apartment felt alien, the clink of dishes, the low hum of the fridge, even the smell of her perfume, sweet and mocking. When I opened the door, she smiled at me like nothing had changed. "Hey, how was your evening?" she asked, completely unaware that everything I'd ever trusted her with had just been shattered. I wanted to throw the evidence at her, to scream, to demand a reckoning, but instead, I said nothing. I forced a smile, nodded, and went into the bedroom, letting the weight of betrayal settle over me like a suffocating blanket. That night, lying awake beside her, I realized with a cold, bitter clarity, this marriage was over. But I wasn't going to let her ruin me without a fight. Not with tears, not with confrontation, not publicly. I just needed a plan. After that night, something inside me shifted. I couldn't confront Sarah yet, not out of fear, but out of strategy. I had spent years giving everything: money, time, energy. Now I realized I had to protect myself first. Quietly, meticulously, I began planning. Every bill she thought she was entitled to, every savings account, every financial record, I reviewed it all. I documented my sacrifices, every late-night work session, every extra shift I'd taken, every dollar I'd quietly covered while she spent freely. Outwardly, I acted normal. I laughed at her jokes, helped her with minor tasks around the house, and kept the charade alive. Friends who called me asked if everything was okay, and I nodded. "Yeah, just busy," I said. Nobody needed to know the storm brewing inside me. Sarah remained oblivious. She continued her routine, socializing, spending, and occasionally throwing small complaints my way, like "You're too serious," or "Why are you always so tired?" Each comment that would have annoyed me before now felt distant, almost meaningless. The real power was in my silence. In the quiet control I held behind the scenes, I started planning contingencies, speaking with a lawyer discreetly, learning exactly what I was entitled to, and figuring out how to leave without giving her the financial advantage she expected. I realized that anger and confrontation wouldn't give me satisfaction strategy, and composure would not at the same time. The emotional weight of betrayal pressed down on me. Lying awake at night, I replayed memories of long hours and exhausted weekends, juxtaposed with her carefree days and secret meetings. It was infuriating, heartbreaking, and yet empowering, because I finally understood one thing. The power wasn't in proving she was wrong. It was in reclaiming my own life, and so I waited, silently gathering my strength, my evidence, and my plan. She had no idea. The woman who thought she controlled everything, including me, was completely unaware that I was about to take everything she thought she deserved. And I would do it without a single dramatic outburst. But patience can be a dangerous thing, And the line between calm planning and simmering rage was thinner than I liked to admit. By now, I had learned the rhythm of our household like a second language. I knew which bills she assumed I was paying, which accounts she thought she could access, and which assets were hers only in her imagination. Quietly, I tightened control, shifting finances, documenting every transaction, and ensuring that the leverage I'd gained was absolute. It was a strange, almost cold satisfaction to see the balance sheets reflect the reality. I had carried this marriage alone, and now I had the means to reclaim what was mine. Outwardly, life continued as normal. Sarah floated around the house smiling, planning lunches with friends, occasionally complaining about chores or what she considered my exhaustion. I listened politely, offered minimal input, and made sure she never suspected a thing. Her confidence in her entitlement was my greatest weapon. She assumed she held power, but in reality, I controlled every part of our shared life that mattered. There were moments that tested my restraint. One evening, she leaned on me, her voice soft and teasing. "You're so serious all the time," she said, tracing a finger across my arm. "Don't you ever relax?" Normally, I might have snapped or argued, but now I only smiled faintly, letting her underestimate me, letting her believe everything was as it had always been. The psychological battle was intoxicating. Every careless remark she made, every assumption of her superiority, became a reminder of the careful plan I had quietly constructed. I had the facts, the evidence, and the upper hand. And yet, beneath the calm exterior, there was a simmering fire. Years of betrayal and invisible labor had built up, and I felt the weight of it pressing against my ribs in quiet, burning anticipation. That night, lying in bed beside her, listening to her soft breathing, I felt a strange mixture of anger, relief, and empowerment. For the first time, I was in control, not through confrontation or drama, but through calm, calculated strategy. She had no idea what was coming, and that realization, more than anything, made the betrayal she thought she had committed feel powerless against me. But I knew the true test was still ahead. The moment of confrontation, of reclaiming my life fully, was approaching, and it would change everything. The day I finally filed for divorce was eerily quiet. There were no screams, no dramatic confrontations, no slamming doors. I walked into the lawyer's office with my documents organized, my evidence meticulously prepared, and my mind steady. Years of sacrifice, sleepless nights, and emotional labor had led to this moment, and I wasn't about to let anger or spectacle dictate how it unfolded when I told Sarah later that evening. Her reaction was nothing like I expected. She froze, blinking at me as if she hadn't heard correctly. "What? What are you talking about?" she stammered, her voice catching. "Divorce." "Why? What about everything we have?" I stayed calm, letting the weight of my words settle between us. "Everything we have? Sarah, you've been living in a fantasy. I've been holding this life together on my own. I've given everything, and you've been elsewhere." My voice didn't tremble. I didn't yell. I let the truth hang in the air like a spotlight she couldn't hide from. Her eyes widened, and for a brief moment I saw something I hadn't expected: shock, disbelief, maybe even fear. You can't just take it all," she said, her voice rising slightly, desperate. I shook my head slowly. "It's not about taking it all. It's about balance. I've done my part for years, and now I'm reclaiming what's mine. This isn't punishment tits, just reality." The irony was intoxicating. The woman who had believed she controlled everything, including me, was suddenly powerless, blindsided by a life she assumed was secure. I didn't gloat. I didn't rub it in. I just stood there, quiet, composed, letting her confront the consequences of her actions without theatrics. Later that night, I packed a small bag and stayed in a friend's apartment. I could hear the muffled sounds of her moving around the house, panicked, confused, and for the first time, she couldn't manipulate or charm her way out of this. And in that silence, I realized something. The quiet reclaiming of my life, the methodical, controlled response, was more satisfying than any dramatic confrontation could have been. But the real test, the aftermath, the emotional fallout, was still to come. Sarah's world unraveled quietly, and I watched from a distance. She didn't expect it, not the calm, methodical way I had reclaimed control. No screaming matches, no public spectacle, just reality hitting her like a silent, unavoidable wave. The life she thought she could manipulate, the money she assumed was hers, and the stability she counted on all of it was slipping through her fingers. A week after filing, I saw her sitting in the living room, phone in hand. Scrolling frantically through accounts she thought she could access, her face was pale, eyes wide, a mixture of shock and disbelief. How? How did he do this? I heard a friend whisper when they called later. I didn't need to intervene. The knowledge that she had no idea how carefully I had planned everything was almost delicious. She tried subtle manipulation, calling me under the guise of talking things through, but I stayed firm. Sarah, there's nothing to talk through. The marriage is over. You know the terms? Accept reality. My tone was calm, measured, unshakable, and I realized that calm was more devastating than anger could have been. For the first time, I felt the scales truly tip in my favor. The years of betrayal, of hidden infidelity, of unacknowledged sacrifice, all of it had led to this moment. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need to humiliate her publicly. The quiet truth of what I had endured, contrasted with her shocked realization, was enough. Walking away from her that evening, I noticed how the apartment, once filled with her carefree energy, now felt heavy and hollow. The home I had maintained, the life I had carried almost single-handedly, was hers no longer to take for granted. And in that quiet emptiness, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: freedom. I was free from deceit, from emotional manipulation, from the burden of carrying someone else's life while neglecting my own. But even as relief washed over me, I knew healing would take time, and that the next steps for building, rediscovering, would define the person I was about to become. The first few weeks after the divorce felt surreal. I walked through our apartment one last time, taking in the silence, the faint scent of her perfume lingering in the corners. It was strange, almost peaceful, and yet bittersweet. The memories of long nights I'd spent working while she lounged nearby flashed in my mind, mixed with flashes of betrayal and heartbreak, but instead of despair, I felt a growing sense of clarity. I had survived it. I had reclaimed my life. Friends reached out, offering support and checking in, and for the first time in years, I allowed myself to lean on them. I spoke honestly about my exhaustion, my frustration, the betrayal I had endured. I let myself grieve not just for the marriage that ended, but for the years I had spent pouring everything into someone who didn't reciprocate. Each conversation felt like lifting a weight from my chest, a slow, careful untangling of emotions I had buried beneath responsibility. I began to rebuild my routine. Morning runs replaced late nights at the office, small dinners with friends replaced lonely takeout meals, and I rediscovered hobbies I had abandoned. I reveled in the quiet victories, paying my own bills on my own terms, enjoying a weekend without obligations to someone who had taken my efforts for granted. The emotional freedom was intoxicating, and I began to understand that my value wasn't measured by the sacrifices I made for someone else. It was measured by how I cared for myself. Reflection came in waves. I replayed the moments, the subtle red flags I had ignored, the signs of betrayal I had rationalized, and instead of self-blame, I felt empowerment. I had faced deceit with patience and strategy, not fury. I had won in silence, and that victory belonged solely to me. Even in the quiet moments, I felt hope. The future seemed vast, open to possibilities I hadn't considered, while trapped in a marriage that had demanded everything from me. I realized that healing wasn't just about moving on, it was about discovering who I was, and who I wanted to be, beyond the shadow of betrayal. And though the past lingered, it no longer defined me. It's been months since the divorce, and for the first time, I feel completely untethered. The quiet, calculated path I took to reclaim my life brought me here not in rage or vindictive spectacle, but in calm, measured empowerment. I walk through my days now with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years, unburdened by the weight of betrayal or the invisible labor I once carried for someone who never appreciated it. Occasionally, I hear through mutual friends about Sarah, about the confusion and shock she's living with. Part of me could feel satisfaction, the kind that comes from knowing justice isn't always loud. She expected drama, confrontation, maybe public humiliation. My silence, my calm, and the simple act of taking control quietly was more powerful than anything I could have shouted. That quiet truth, That reclaiming of my life is its own kind of revenge, clean, absolute, and irrevocable. I've also begun to rebuild emotionally. I savor the small moments, a cup of coffee at sunrise, evening walks without worry, weekends spent exploring hobbies I'd abandoned. My friends, my family, the world outside the house, I engage with it fully now, without compromise, without pretending to be someone I'm not. I've learned to set boundaries, to demand respect, and to recognize my own worth in ways I never did before. Sometimes, I think about the man I was, the one who sacrificed everything for a life that didn't exist. And I smile quietly because that man is gone. I've emerged stronger, wiser, and more self-assured. The betrayal that once felt like a crushing weight is now a distant echo, a lesson in strength and strategy. And if Sarah ever reaches out nostalgic or curious about my life, I know exactly what I will say: nothing. Because I no longer need validation, revenge, or closure from her. I have it all within me. For the first time in years, I am free. I am whole. I am me. The chapter is closed, and this time I'm writing the story of my own life.